Imagine a person who has always been kind, compassionate and morally upright, someone who would never hurt another soul, who stands for justice, who helps others without expecting anything in return. Now, imagine that same person over time, becoming unrecognizable, capable of cruelty, deception, even destruction. What causes this transformation? How does someone go from being good to being a monster? Today we will uncover the psychological and philosophical forces that shape human nature, revealing the hidden mechanisms that push good people toward darkness. And the final revelation will be the most powerful of all. It will change the way you see human nature forever. This is not just a theoretical discussion. Understanding this transformation is crucial because it affects all of us. You might think that you could never fall into such darkness, that you are immune to the forces that corrupt others. But history and science tell a different story. The terrifying truth is that under the right conditions, anyone, no matter how kind, how just, how morally strong, can descend into something they once despised. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, the man behind the infamous Stanford prison experiment, revealed how ordinary people, placed in certain circumstances, can commit acts of cruelty they never imagined. His research, along with studies from figures like Stanley Milgram, show that our sense of morality is far more fragile than we think. The shocking part? Most people never realize they are changing until it is too late. But what are the forces that drive this change? What unseen influences slowly wear down the goodness in a person, replacing it with something darker? That is exactly what we are going to uncover. The truth may be uncomfortable, even disturbing, but it is necessary, because only by understanding this process can we prevent it from happening, to ourselves and to those around us. There are several factors at play, and each one is more insidious than the last. First, there is the slow erosion of moral boundaries. It does not happen overnight. It begins with small compromises, justifications, and tiny betrayals of one's own principles. A person might tell themselves, "This is just a small thing. It does not really matter." But once the first boundary is crossed, the next one is easier to step over. This is known as the slippery slope effect. A well-intentioned person might start making small ethical exceptions in difficult situations, perhaps lying to protect someone, bending rules for a good cause, or justifying minor wrongdoing in the name of necessity. At first, these actions seem harmless, but over time they reshape the person's identity. What once was unthinkable now seems reasonable, and when that happens, the descent accelerates. Then there is the influence of authority and obedience. One of the most chilling psychological studies ever conducted was by Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. Participants were instructed to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person, simply because an authority figure told them to. The results? The majority of participants continued delivering shocks, even when they believed they were causing serious harm, because they felt compelled to obey. This reveals a terrifying truth. Even good people under the right conditions can become tools of harm. They may not act out of malice, but out of duty, pressure, or fear of consequences. They convince themselves that they are just following orders, that they have no choice, and in doing so they allow their morality to be overridden. But it does not stop there. Another key factor is the power of group identity. When people become deeply attached to a group, whether political, religious, social, or ideological, they begin to see those outside the group as the other. And when that happens, a dangerous psychological shift occurs. History is filled with examples of how ordinary people were led to commit horrific acts because they were convinced that their enemies were less than human. Dehumanization is one of the most powerful tools in the transformation of good people into monsters. It allows individuals to justify harm by seeing their victims as undeserving of empathy. Think about how many atrocities in history were committed by people who at one point considered themselves good, moral, even righteous. They did not wake up one morning and decide to become monsters. It was a slow process, fueled by small moral compromises, obedience to authority, and a growing sense of us versus them. And here is the most unsettling question of all. Could it happen to you? Could you, under the right pressures, under the right influences, become something you never thought possible? The answer is more complicated than you might think, and in the next section, we will go even deeper into the psychology of justification, the illusion of righteousness, and the final, most dangerous step in this descent, The most shocking truth of all is yet to come. One of the most dangerous aspects of this transformation is self-justification. People rarely see themselves as villains, even when they are committing terrible acts. Instead, they create narratives that allow them to believe they are still good, still righteous, still on the side of justice, even when their actions suggest otherwise. This is where cognitive dissonance comes into play. Psychologist Leon Festinger introduced this concept to describe the mental discomfort we experience when our actions contradict our beliefs. When faced with this contradiction, we do not always change our actions. More often, we change our beliefs to justify our actions. Imagine someone who sees themselves as a kind and ethical person, but who finds themselves in a situation where they must harm others, whether physically, emotionally, or socially. Instead of admitting they have crossed a line, they tell themselves, "I had no choice," or "they deserved it," or "this is for a greater good." This process allows them to continue seeing themselves as good while doing things they once thought were unthinkable. This is why history is filled with examples of people committing atrocities while believing they were doing the right thing. When people justify their actions, they silence their inner conscience. And once that voice is silenced, the descent into darkness accelerates. But cognitive dissonance alone does not explain everything. There is another force at work, one that is even more insidious. It is the illusion of righteousness. People do not just justify their own harmful actions, they often begin to see themselves as superior to others. The more someone believes they are morally righteous, the easier it is for them to condemn and harm those they see as less moral. This is known as moral licensing. Studies have shown that when people see themselves as good, they often feel justified in doing bad things. A person who donates to charity in the morning might feel less guilty about lying in the afternoon. A leader who believes they are fighting for justice might feel justified in silencing those who disagree. The irony is that the more people see themselves as righteous, the more blind they become to their own moral failures. History has proven this time and time again. Some of the greatest horrors were committed not by people who saw themselves as evil, but by those who believed they were on the right side of history. And this brings us to one of the most dangerous steps in the transformation of good people into monsters: dehumanization. When people begin to see others as enemies, as obstacles, as less than human, their moral restraints collapse. This is how individuals justify cruelty, oppression, and even violence. This is why soldiers in war are trained to see the enemy not as people, but as threats. It is why political and ideological conflicts so often turn vicious, because both sides begin to see each other not as fellow humans, but as something less. The moment someone stops seeing another person as fully human, they free themselves from the guilt of harming them. This is why throughout history, propaganda has been used to paint enemies as evil, corrupt, or subhuman, because once that mental shift happens, morality no longer applies. But here is the terrifying part. This process does not just happen on a large scale, in wars or political movements. It happens in everyday life. It happens in workplaces, when people justify cruelty toward colleagues they dislike. It happens in relationships, when partners convince themselves that their actions are justified because the other person deserves it. It happens online, when people attack strangers with words they would never use in real life because they do not see them as real people. And it can happen to any of us. No one is immune. So now we must ask ourselves the most difficult question of all. If good people can turn into monsters, how can we stop it from happening? The answer is not simple. But in the next part, we will uncover the hidden safeguards, the psychological defenses that can prevent this descent. Because while darkness is always present, so is the light. If good people can turn into monsters, then understanding how to prevent this transformation is one of the most crucial lessons we can learn. Because while darkness is always present, so is the light. And the difference between the two often comes down to awareness, self-reflection, and the strength to resist the forces that seek to corrupt us. The first and most powerful defense is self-awareness. Many people believe they are immune to corruption simply because they see themselves as good. But as we have seen, morality is fragile, and good intentions are not enough to prevent someone from falling into darkness. In fact, the belief that I could never do something like that is often the first step toward moral blindness. Self-awareness means recognizing our own capacity for wrongdoing. It means understanding that under the right pressures, in the right circumstances, we too could be led astray. This is not a comfortable truth, but it is a necessary one, because only when we acknowledge our vulnerability can we take steps to guard against it. One of the most effective ways to build self-awareness is through reflection. Regularly questioning our own actions, motives, and justifications helps us stay connected to our core values. Asking questions like, am I justifying something now that I once believed was wrong? Am I treating someone differently because I see them as less in some way? Am I allowing an authority figure or a group to dictate my sense of right and wrong? If someone else were doing what I am doing now, would I still think it is acceptable? These questions force us to confront the uncomfortable reality that we are all capable of justifying harm when it suits us. But awareness alone is not enough. We must also develop the strength to resist. This is where moral courage comes in. It is easy to stand by our principles when there is no cost. But true moral strength is tested when doing the right thing is difficult, when speaking out means facing rejection, when standing firm means losing status or comfort. History is filled with stories of those who failed this test, people who went along with injustice because it was easier, who remained silent while others suffered. But it is also filled with those who passed, people who resisted, who refused to conform, who chose integrity over convenience. Psychologists have studied what makes certain individuals stand against corruption while others fall into it. One of the key factors is having a strong internal moral compass, one that is not easily swayed by external pressures. This comes from deeply understanding one's values, but also from practicing small acts of integrity every day. Because when we compromise on small things, it becomes easier to compromise on big things. Another critical safeguard is empathy. Many of the mechanisms that turn good people into monsters rely on reducing empathy, on making others seem distant, different, less than human. But empathy is a force that can cut through these illusions. When we take the time to truly understand others, to see their struggles, their fears, their humanity, it becomes much harder to justify harming them. Studies have shown that even brief moments of connection, hearing someone's story, learning about their experiences, can dramatically reduce prejudice and hostility. But perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: corruption is rarely a single event. It is almost always a slow process, built on small choices, minor compromises, and gradual shifts in thinking. And this means that stopping it is also a process, one that requires constant vigilance, self-reflection, and the courage to act when it matters most. In the final part, we will reveal the ultimate truth, the deepest reason why good people can become monsters. This is the final, most dangerous force at play, and once you understand it, you will never see human nature the same way again. There is one final, terrifying truth that explains why good people turn into monsters. It is the force that underlies every transformation we have discussed: the slow erosion of morality, the justification of wrongdoing, the power of obedience, the illusion of righteousness, and the loss of empathy. It is the power of the environment. More than any internal flaw, more than any personal weakness, it is the world around us, the systems we live in, the cultures we absorb, the influences we are exposed to, that shapes who we become. A person is not born good or evil. They are shaped, molded, and guided by the forces around them. And if those forces encourage cruelty, division, and moral compromise, even the best of us can be led astray. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, in his research on human behavior, introduced the idea of the Lucifer effect. He showed that under certain conditions, ordinary people can be led to commit extraordinary evil, not because they are inherently bad, but because they are placed in an environment that slowly warps their sense of right and wrong. Think about the many ways this happens in daily life. A workplace where unethical behavior is tolerated soon breeds employees who accept dishonesty as normal. A society that normalizes discrimination leads people to believe their prejudices are justified. A culture that rewards aggression over compassion creates individuals who see kindness as weakness. This is why no one can afford to be complacent. It is not enough to simply believe that we are good people. We must actively shape the environment we are in. We must surround ourselves with people who encourage integrity, who challenge us to be better, who hold us accountable when we stray from our values. Because just as the wrong environment can corrupt, the right one can strengthen. But here is the most unsettling question of all. If the environment is so powerful, if external forces shape who we become, then how much of who we are is truly under our control? The answer is both frightening and liberating. While we cannot always control the world around us, we can control our response to it. We can choose awareness over blindness, courage over conformity, empathy over indifference. We can resist the small compromises that lead to moral decay. We can ask hard questions, challenge harmful norms, and refuse to let the world dictate who we become. And most importantly, we can recognize that the battle between good and evil is not something that happens outside of us. It happens within us, every day, in every choice we make. The philosopher Alexander Solzhenitsyn once wrote, "The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. This is the final truth. There are no absolute monsters, just as there are no absolute saints. There are only people who are shaped by their choices, by their surroundings, and by their willingness to confront the darkness within themselves." So ask yourself, who are you becoming? Are you making choices that strengthen your integrity, or are you allowing small compromises to lead you down a path you never intended? Are you shaping your environment, or is it shaping you? Because in the end, the difference between a good person and a monster is not fate, it is choice. And that choice is yours to make, every single day. Thanks for looking.